Throughout history, there have been individuals whose eccentricities, quirks, and unconventional lifestyles have set them apart from their contemporaries. Each of these individuals, in their own unique way, challenged societal norms and left behind legacies that continue to intrigue us to this day. Let's begin our journey with the flamboyant and controversial figure of Lord Byron, a man whose name has become synonymous with the idea of the romantic hero. George Gordon Byron, 6th Baron Byron, commonly known as Lord Byron, was born in 1788 in London. From an early age, Byron stood out, not just for his poetic talents, but for his larger-than-life personality and scandalous lifestyle. He was born with a clubfoot, which caused him to walk with a limp throughout his life. This physical imperfection seemed to fuel his desire to prove himself in other areas, particularly in literature and love affairs. Byron's poetry, characterized by its emotional intensity, melancholy, and rebellious spirit, quickly gained him fame in the early 19th century. Works like Childe Harold's Pilgrimage and Don Juan established him as one of the leading figures of the Romantic movement. However, it was his personal life that truly set him apart as an odd and fascinating historical figure. Byron's love life was nothing short of scandalous by the standards of his time, or indeed by any standards. He had numerous affairs with both men and women, including a possible incestuous relationship with his half-sister, Augusta Lee. His sexual appetite was voracious, and he kept detailed records of his conquests. He once famously declared, "I have a passion for women with alabaster skin," and pursued his passions with reckless abandon. But Byron's eccentricities extended beyond his romantic exploits. He was known for his extravagant lifestyle and peculiar habits. He kept a menagerie of animals in his rooms at Cambridge University, including a bear, which he claimed he was keeping as a pet because the university regulations banned dogs. When asked why he needed a pet, Byron replied that the bear would someday sit for a fellowship. Byron was also obsessed with his weight and would go to extreme measures to maintain his figure. He would often wear multiple layers of clothing to induce sweating and would subsist on a diet of soda water and biscuits. At other times, he would binge on huge meals, only to purge afterward. Despite his personal turmoil and controversial reputation, Byron was also known for his good looks, wit, and charm. Byron's life came to an early end at the age of 36. In a final act that cemented his reputation as a romantic hero, he traveled to Greece to fight in the Greek War of Independence against the Ottoman Empire. He died of a fever in Missolonghi in 1824, never having seen battle, but leaving behind a legacy as one of the most colorful and controversial figures of the Romantic era. From the flamboyant world of Lord Byron, let's turn our attention to a man who could not have been more different: the brilliant but reclusive scientist, Henry Cavendish. Born in 1731 into an aristocratic British family, Henry Cavendish was a natural philosopher, scientist, and an important experimental and theoretical chemist and physicist. Despite his noble background and groundbreaking scientific work, Cavendish was known for his extreme shyness and reclusiveness, traits that have made him one of the most peculiar figures in the history of science. Cavendish's contributions to science were immense. He discovered hydrogen, which he called inflammable air, and was the first to recognize that water was not an element, but a compound of hydrogen and oxygen. He also calculated the density of the Earth with remarkable accuracy, determined the composition of the atmosphere, and made significant contributions to the study of electricity. What makes Cavendish truly stand out, however, was his bizarre personal behavior. He was pathologically shy, especially around women. It's said that he had a back staircase built in his house so he could avoid encountering his housekeeper. He would reportedly leave notes for his female servants rather than speaking to them directly, and if he encountered one by accident, he would flee in terror. Cavendish's social awkwardness extended to his interactions with fellow scientists as well. He rarely attended social functions, and when he did, he was known to stand silently in a corner, only speaking when directly addressed about scientific matters. Even then, his responses were often brief and to the point. Despite his wealth, he was reportedly the largest depositor in the Bank of England at one point. Cavendish lived a Spartan lifestyle. He wore the same faded violet frock coat for years and ate the same meals day after day. His eccentricity extended to his scientific work as well. He often failed to publish his findings, leaving many of his discoveries to be rediscovered by others years later. Despite his peculiarities, or perhaps because of them, Cavendish was able to focus intensely on his scientific pursuits, making discoveries that were far ahead of his time. His work laid the groundwork for many future scientific advancements, even though much of it wasn't fully appreciated until after his death. Cavendish died in 1810, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most important scientists of his era, as well as one of the most eccentric. His life serves as a fascinating example of how great scientific achievement can coexist with extreme social difficulties. From the reclusive world of Henry Cavendish, let's move on to a man whose eccentricities were of a very different nature. William Buckland, the geologist with an insatiable appetite for knowledge, quite literally. William Buckland, born in 1784, was an English theologian who became famous as a geologist and paleontologist. He was a pioneer in the use of fossil evidence to reconstruct ancient environments and was the first person to write a full account of a fossil dinosaur. However, it wasn't just his scientific achievements that made him stand out. It was his peculiar eating habits and eccentric behavior that truly set him apart. Buckland had an unusual goal: to eat his way through the entire animal kingdom. This wasn't just a figure of speech. He literally attempted to taste every animal he could get his hands on. His daughter noted that the strangest thing he had ever eaten was the preserved heart of King Louis XIV, which he allegedly consumed while on a tour of France. His unusual culinary adventures didn't stop there. Buckland's house was filled with specimens, both living and dead, which he would often serve to dinner guests. These meals might include mice on toast, roasted hedgehog, or even crocodile. He claimed that the worst thing he ever ate was a bluebottle fly, though one has to wonder about his basis for comparison. Buckland's eccentricities extended beyond his dietary habits. He was known for his theatrical lectures, often arriving at Oxford University with a hyena on a leash. He would use this opportunity to demonstrate how hyenas crushed bones, much to the amazement and likely horror of his students. Despite these odd behaviors, Buckland was a serious and respected scientist. He made significant contributions to the fields of geology and paleontology. He was the first person to scientifically describe a dinosaur fossil, which he named Megalosaurus. Part 2. From the world of science and unusual culinary adventures, let's shift our focus to the realm of music and self-delusion with the fascinating story of Florence Foster Jenkins. Born in 1868 in Pennsylvania, Florence Foster Jenkins was an American socialite and amateur soprano who became a cult figure in New York City and beyond for her lack of rhythm, pitch, tone, and overall singing ability. Despite her complete lack of musical talent, Jenkins was convinced of her own greatness and performed regularly for adoring audiences who attended her concerts for the sheer entertainment value of her awful singing. Jenkins's musical ambitions began early in life, but her wealthy father refused to pay for music lessons. After her father's death, she inherited enough money to fund her own musical career. She began taking voice lessons and became involved in the musical social circles of Philadelphia and later New York City. What made Jenkins truly unique was her utter lack of self-awareness when it came to her singing abilities. She would often perform extremely difficult arias from famous operas, mangling them beyond recognition, yet remained completely oblivious to the true nature of the audience's reaction. While people were laughing and struggling to contain their mirth, Jenkins believed they were appreciating her artistic talent. Her performances became social events, with audience members stuffing handkerchiefs in their mouths to stifle their laughter. Despite this, her recitals were consistently sold out. She had a small but loyal group of fans who genuinely appreciated her courage and unconventional performances, while many others attended purely for the comedic value. Jenkins's fashion choices were as outlandish as her singing. She would often perform in elaborate costumes of her own design, including angelic wings, tinsel, and tulle. For one famous performance, she threw flowers into the audience from a basket while singing Clavelitos by Valverde, When she ran out of flowers, she began throwing the petals from the flowers in her hair and finally threw the basket itself. Perhaps the pinnacle of Jenkins's career came in 1944 when, at the age of 76, she performed at Carnegie Hall. The event sold out weeks in advance, with celebrities like Cole Porter in attendance. Jenkins, apparently still oblivious to the true nature of her fame, reportedly said after the concert, "People may say I can't sing, but no one can ever say I didn't sing." Florence Foster Jenkins passed away in 1944, just over a month after her Carnegie Hall performance. Finally, let's travel back in time and across the world to ancient China, where we encounter the brilliant strategist and eccentric figure of Zhuge Liang. Zhuge Liang, born in 181 AD, was a chancellor and regent of the state of Shuhan during the Three Kingdoms period of China. He is recognized as one of the most accomplished strategists in Chinese history, with intellectual achievements ranging from military strategy to astronomy and agriculture. However, it was not just his brilliance that made him stand out, but also his unconventional methods and mysterious persona. Known as the Crouching Dragon, Zhuge Liang lived as a recluse in his youth, devoting himself to study and contemplation. He was said to have possessed an almost supernatural level of wisdom and foresight. When the warlord Liu Bei came to recruit him, it reportedly took 3 visits before Zhuge Liang agreed to leave his simple life and join Liu Bei's cause. Once in service, Zhuge Liang quickly proved his worth through his strategic brilliance. However, it was his unorthodox tactics that truly set him apart. One of the most famous stories about Zhuge Liang involves the empty fort strategy. According to this tale, when Zhuge Liang found himself in a city with few soldiers facing an overwhelming enemy force, he ordered the gates to be opened and sat on the city wall playing a lute. The enemy general, suspecting a trap due to Zhuge Liang's reputation for cunning, retreated without attacking. Zhuge Liang was also known for his inventions. He is credited with creating an early form of the landmine, a counterweighted siege crossbow, and even a primitive ox-powered mechanical device that is sometimes described as an early ancestor of the automobile. He also reportedly invented a type of mantu, steamed bun, to feed the army when they ran out of food during a military campaign. His eccentricities extended to his personal habits as well. He was said to sleep with his eyes open and walk while sleeping, leading to rumors that he never actually slept at all. He was also known for his distinctive fashion, always appearing in public wearing a Taoist robe and carrying a feather fan, which became his iconic symbols. Zhuge Liang's reputation for wisdom and strategy was so great that it reportedly continued even after his death. According to legend, he devised a plan to use scarecrows to fool the enemy into thinking his army was still active, allowing his forces to retreat safely after his death. This incident, known as the Dead Man's Ploy, further cemented his reputation as a master strategist. While many of the stories about Zhuge Liang have likely been embellished over time, they speak to the lasting impact he had on Chinese culture and history. His combination of brilliant strategy, inventive thinking, and eccentric behavior made him a figure of fascination, both in his own time and for centuries afterward. These odd historical personalities serve as a reminder that greatness often comes hand in hand with eccentricity. They show us that the path to leaving a lasting mark on history isn't always a conventional one. Whether through scientific discovery, literary genius, military strategy, or simply the courage to pursue one's passions regardless of talent, these individuals have fascinated generations with their peculiarities. Moreover, their stories encourage us to embrace our own quirks and eccentricities. In a world that often values conformity, these historical figures remind us of the value of individuality and the potential for unconventional thinking to lead to great achievements. As we look back on these odd personalities, we might also wonder, who are the eccentric geniuses and fascinating oddballs of our own time? And how will history remember the quirks and eccentricities of our era? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain. The tapestry of human history is all the richer for including these colorful and unconventional characters. Have you ever wondered about the diverse and sometimes shocking marriage customs that have existed throughout history? Today, we're going to explore 4 fascinating and controversial marriage-related cultural practices from different parts of the world. These practices, while foreign and often disturbing to modern sensibilities, offer unique insights into the societies that practice them and the complex interplay of social, economic, and religious factors that shape marriage customs. Let's start our journey in the frigid expanses of the Arctic, where the Inuit people developed a unique approach to marriage and social bonds, the Inuit wife exchange. Among certain Inuit communities, particularly in Alaska and northern Canada, a practice known as wife exchange or wife sharing was once common. This custom, also called wife swapping or spouse exchange, was a complex social arrangement that served multiple purposes within Inuit society. Contrary to what the name might suggest, this wasn't a casual or frivolous practice. Instead, it was a serious social institution that helped strengthen bonds between families and ensured survival in the harsh Arctic environment. The exchange was typically temporary and occurred with the full consent of all parties involved. There were several reasons behind this practice. Firstly, by exchanging wives, men from different families or communities could form strong bonds, creating a network of support crucial for survival in the challenging Arctic environment. Also, in small isolated communities, wife exchange helped introduce genetic diversity, reducing the risks associated with inbreeding. The practice facilitated sharing of resources and labor between families, enhancing overall community survival, and wife exchange could sometimes be used as a means to resolve disputes between men or families. It's important to note that women weren't passive objects in these exchanges. They often had a say in the arrangement and could refuse if they wished. The children born from these temporary unions were typically raised by the woman and her original husband, with the biological father maintaining some responsibilities. The practice of wife exchange began to decline with the arrival of Western missionaries and the subsequent Christianization of many Inuit communities. Today, it's largely a historical practice, though some anthropologists suggest that echoes of it may still exist in some remote communities. Now, let's travel south to the Indian subcontinent, where we encounter a drastically different and much more tragic marriage-related custom. Sati, widow burning in India. Sati was a historical Hindu practice where a widow would immolate herself on her husband's funeral pyre. The term sati literally means good woman or chaste wife in Sanskrit, and the practice was seen as the ultimate demonstration of a wife's devotion to her husband. The origins of sati are disputed, with some tracing it back to ancient times, while others argue it became widespread much later, perhaps around the medieval period. The practice was never universally followed across India, but was more common among certain communities, particularly in Rajasthan and Bengal. The reasons behind sati were complex and multifaceted. 1. Some interpreted Hindu scriptures as promoting the idea that a wife's duty was to follow her husband in death as in life. 2. Social pressure. Widows in traditional Hindu society often faced severe social ostracism and economic hardship. Sati was sometimes seen as an honorable alternative. 3. Family honor. In some cases, families pressured widows to commit sati to uphold family prestige or to avoid the economic burden of supporting a widow. 4. Property rights. There's evidence that sati was sometimes encouraged to prevent widows from inheriting their husband's property. The practice of sati was not without its critics, even in traditional Indian society. Many Hindu scholars argued that it had no basis in the core Hindu scriptures. With the arrival of European colonizers, particularly the British, opposition to sati grew stronger. In 1829, the British colonial administration in India, led by Governor-General William Bentinck, passed the Bengal Sati Regulation, making the practice of sati illegal and punishable by courts. This was later extended to all of British India. However, the practice continued in some areas, particularly in princely states not directly under British rule. After India gained independence in 1947, the government reinforced the ban on sati. In 1987, following a high-profile sati incident in Rajasthan, the Indian government passed the Sati Prevention Act, which made it illegal to glorify or support the practice in any way. Despite these legal measures, isolated incidents of sati or attempted sati have been reported even in recent years, highlighting the persistence of some traditional beliefs. However, these incidents are now extremely rare and universally condemned by mainstream Indian society. The story of sati serves as a stark reminder of how deeply entrenched cultural practices can be, even when they involve extreme personal sacrifice. It also illustrates the complex challenges involved in reforming traditional practices, especially when they intersect with religious beliefs and social structures. Now let's shift our focus to a very different type of marriage, one that doesn't involve human partners at all. We're heading to the romantic city of Venice, Italy. The Venetian Doge's marriage to the sea. Venice, the city of canals and gondolas, was for centuries one of the most powerful maritime republics in the world. At the head of this unique city-state was the Doge, an elected leader who served for life. One of the most colorful and symbolic duties of the Doge was to perform an annual ceremony known as the Marriage of the Sea, or Sposalizio del Mare in Italian. This tradition began in the year 1000 AD during the reign of Doge Pietro II Orseolo. Venice had just won a significant naval victory, securing its dominance over the Adriatic Sea. To commemorate this triumph and symbolize Venice's maritime power, the Doge began the practice of marrying the sea each year on Ascension Day. The ceremony was a grand spectacle that attracted visitors from all over Europe. Here's how it typically unfolded. The Doge would board a magnificent ship called the Bucintoro, a grand state barge decorated with gold and scarlet. Accompanied by a flotilla of smaller boats and gondolas, the Bucintoro would sail out into the Adriatic Sea. Upon reaching the open waters, the Doge would stand at the stern of the ship and cast a golden ring into the sea. As he did so, he would recite in Latin, "We wed thee, sea, in the sign of the true and everlasting Lord." This symbolic marriage represented Venice's dominion over the sea, which was crucial to the city's power and wealth. The ring represented the city's mastery over maritime trade and naval warfare, both of which were foundation of Venice's prosperity. The marriage of the sea continued annually for nearly 800 years, until the fall of the Venetian Republic to Napoleon in 1797. Today, a modified version of the ceremony is still performed as a historical reenactment and tourist attraction. Now, for our final stop, we're going to journey back in time to ancient Mesopotamia to explore a marriage custom that might seem more like a business transaction to modern eyes: auctioning of unmarried women in Babylon. In his work Histories, the ancient Greek historian Herodotus described a fascinating and controversial marriage custom that he claimed existed in ancient Babylon. According to Herodotus, once a year, all the marriageable young women in each village would be gathered together in one place. The men would then bid on them, with the most beautiful women commanding the highest prices. Here's how Herodotus described the process. All marriageable maidens would be brought together in one place. Men would gather around them in a circle. An auctioneer would present each woman in turn, starting with the most beautiful. Each woman would be sold to the highest bidder. The money raised from the most beautiful women would then be used as dowries for the less attractive women who were auctioned off next. Men bidding on the less attractive women would receive monetary compensation along with their brides. No man was allowed to marry his daughter to whomever he pleased. All marriages had to go through this auction process. However, it's important to note that many historians today are skeptical about Herodotus's account. While Herodotus is an important source for ancient history, he was known to include sensationalized or second-hand accounts in his work. No Babylonian sources have been found that confirm this practice, and it doesn't align with what we know about Babylonian marriage customs from other sources. Throughout history, humans have gone to extraordinary lengths in pursuit of beauty, often employing methods that seem shocking, dangerous, or downright bizarre by modern standards. These practices not only highlight the extreme measures people have taken for the sake of appearance. Let's begin our journey into the world of historical beauty practices with a weight loss method that's truly hard to stomach: tapeworm diet pills. In the early 20th century, as societal beauty standards increasingly favored a slender figure, some people turned to a particularly unorthodox method of weight loss: intentionally ingesting tapeworms. This practice, while not widespread, was notable enough to leave its mark on medical and cultural history. Tapeworms are parasitic flatworms that can live in the intestines of humans and other animals. When present in the human digestive system, they absorb a portion of the nutrients from the food their host consumes, potentially leading to weight loss. This biological fact led to the creation of tapeworm diet pills in the early 1900s. These pills, often marketed as sanitized tapeworms, were sold with the promise of effortless weight loss. The idea was simple. Swallow a pill containing a tapeworm egg, let the parasite grow in your intestines and consume some of your food, lose weight, and then take an anti-parasitic medicine to expel the tapeworm when you've reached your desired weight. The marketing for these pills often targeted women, playing on societal pressures to maintain a slim figure. Some advertisements even claimed that users could eat whatever they want and still lose weight thanks to their new intestinal tenant. The use of tapeworms for weight loss was never sanctioned by the medical community, and as understanding of parasitic infections grew, the practice fell out of favor. In the United States, the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 and subsequent legislation made it illegal to market tapeworms for weight loss. Today, the idea of tapeworm diets persists more as a horrifying curiosity than an actual practice. However, it serves as a stark reminder of the lengths to which some people will go in pursuit of idealized body standards, as well as the importance of scientific understanding and regulation in matters of health and beauty. From intestinal parasites, let's move on to another unconventional beauty treatment, this time from ancient Egypt. Bathing in crocodile dung. The ancient Egyptians are renowned for their elaborate beauty rituals and cosmetic preparations. They place great importance on personal hygiene and appearance, believing that cleanliness and beauty were closely linked to spiritual purity. Among their many beauty practices, one stands out as particularly unusual to modern sensibilities: bathing in crocodile dung. According to historical accounts, some ancient Egyptians, particularly those of higher social status, would bathe in a mixture of crocodile dung and mud. This practice was believed to have several beautifying and medicinal effects. The mixture was thought to cleanse and exfoliate the skin, leaving it smoother and younger looking. Some believed that the dung bath could help reduce the appearance of wrinkles. The antibacterial properties of the dung were thought to help treat acne and other skin conditions, and surprisingly, the dung bath was believed to help control body odor. It's worth noting that crocodile dung does contain enzymes that could potentially have some exfoliating effect on the skin. However, from a modern medical perspective, bathing in animal feces poses significant health risks, including the potential for parasitic infections and other diseases. The practice of using crocodile dung baths died out long ago, but it remains a fascinating example of how beauty standards and practices can vary dramatically across cultures and time periods. Now, let's move forward in time to Renaissance Italy, where we encounter a beauty practice that truly exemplifies the phrase, "beauty is pain." Belladonna eye drops. During the Renaissance period in Italy, and later spreading to other parts of Europe, women and some men employed a particularly dangerous method to achieve what was considered a desirable eye appearance: the use of belladonna eye drops. Belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, is a plant that contains alkaloids such as atropine and scopolamine. When applied to the eyes, these compounds cause the pupils to dilate significantly. This dilation was considered attractive because it created a doe-eyed look that was associated with youth and innocence. Dilated pupils are also a natural physical response to attraction, so artificially dilated pupils might subconsciously signal interest or arousal. The enlarged pupils made the eyes appear darker and more mysterious. The name belladonna itself comes from Italian, meaning beautiful woman, indicating how closely this plant was associated with beauty practices. Users would carefully extract the juice from belladonna berries and apply a small amount to their eyes. The effects would last for several hours, during which time the user's vision would be blurry and they would be extremely sensitive to light. However, the risks associated with this practice were severe. Belladonna is highly toxic. Even small amounts absorbed through the eyes could lead to systemic poisoning, causing symptoms like rapid heartbeat, hallucinations, and in extreme cases, death. Despite this risk, the practice persisted for centuries. It was particularly popular among courtesans and nobles, who were often willing to go to extreme lengths to enhance their appearance. The use of belladonna for cosmetic purposes declined in the 19th and 20th centuries as the dangers became more widely understood and beauty standards evolved. Finally, let's explore a beauty practice that was popular for centuries and spread across multiple cultures despite its toxic nature. Lead-based face powder. From the Renaissance through the 18th century, both men and women in many parts of Europe and later in the American colonies used lead-based face powder as a cosmetic. This practice was particularly prevalent among the upper classes and was used to achieve a fashionable pale complexion. The use of white lead, also known as ceruse, as a cosmetic can be traced back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, but it reached its peak of popularity in the 16th to 18th centuries. The powder was made by mixing lead with vinegar, creating lead acetate, which was then dried and ground into a fine white powder. There were several reasons why this dangerous substance became so popular. A pale complexion was associated with nobility and wealth, as it indicated that one did not have to work outdoors. Lead-based powder was effective at covering blemishes and creating a smooth, uniform complexion, and the powder gave the skin a desirable pearlescent glow. Users would apply the powder thickly to their faces, necks, and chests, often layering it over other dangerous substances like mercury-based blush. Some would even use it to color their hair white or gray, which was fashionable at times. Famous figures known to have used lead-based powder include Queen Elizabeth I of England, who was renowned for her white-painted face, and Madame de Pompadour, the chief mistress of King Louis XV of France. The use of lead in cosmetics began to decline in the late 18th century as its dangers became more widely recognized. In 1869, the British Medical Journal published a warning about skin creams containing lead, helping to further reduce its use. However, it wasn't until the early 20th century that lead was officially banned in cosmetics in most Western countries. As we look at these historical practices, it's tempting to feel superior and assume that we've moved beyond such dangerous pursuits of beauty. However, it's worth considering that future generations might look back on some of our current beauty practices with similar horror or amusement. From extreme diets to cosmetic surgeries, from potentially harmful skincare ingredients to the psychological impacts of social media beauty standards, we continue to grapple with the complex relationship between health, beauty, and self-image. Perhaps the most valuable lesson we can take from this historical journey is the importance of approaching beauty practices with a critical eye, prioritizing health and well-being over fleeting aesthetic trends. As our understanding of the human body and mind continues to evolve, so too should our approach to beauty, one that celebrates diversity, promotes health, and recognizes the beauty in all individuals. The ancient world was no stranger to acts of sacrilege and plunder, but two events stand out as particularly audacious and ill-fated: the burning of the temple of Artemis at Ephesus and the attempted plundering of the oracle at Delphi. These incidents, separated by less than a century, showcase the heights of human hubris and the depths of failure in the face of revered religious institutions. Let us first turn our attention to the magnificent Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Located in Ephesus, in modern-day Turkey, this grand structure was dedicated to the goddess Artemis, the divine huntress and protector of young women. The temple was a marvel of architecture, with 127 columns, each standing 60 feet high, and was adorned with exquisite sculptures and precious offerings from across the known world. On the night of July 21st, 356 BCE, as the citizens of Ephesus slumbered, a man named Herostratus set fire to this architectural wonder. His motivation? Nothing more than a desperate desire for fame. Herostratus, a young Ephesian of obscure origin, had concluded that the surest path to immortality was to destroy something universally celebrated. In his twisted logic, by burning down the Temple of Artemis, he would ensure that his name would be remembered for all time. The fire raged through the night, consuming the wooden roof beams and causing the stone structure to crumble. By dawn, The once majestic temple lay in ruins, its treasures turned to ash, its beauty obliterated. The people of Ephesus awoke to a scene of utter devastation, their pride and joy reduced to smoldering rubble. Herostratus was quickly apprehended and, under torture, confessed to his crime. The Ephesian authorities were so outraged by his act that they sentenced him not only to death, but also to damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. This meant that it would be forbidden to speak or write his name, in an attempt to deny him the very fame he sought. However, this effort to erase Herostratus from history ultimately failed. The Greek historian Theopompus recorded the event and the perpetrator's name, ensuring that Herostratus did indeed achieve his goal of notoriety, albeit as one of history's most reviled vandals. Ironically, the night of the temple's destruction coincided with the birth of Alexander the Great in Macedonia. Later commentators would remark that Artemis was too preoccupied with Alexander's delivery to save her burning temple. Alexander himself would later offer to pay for the temple's reconstruction, but the proud Ephesians declined, insisting on rebuilding it themselves. The new temple of Artemis, constructed over the next 2 decades, was said to be even more magnificent than its predecessor. However, it too would eventually fall victim to plunder and destruction, first at the hands of Goths in 268 CE, and finally by a Christian mob in 401 CE. Now let us journey to Delphi, the sacred site of Apollo's oracle and one of the most revered religious centers in the ancient Greek world. In 279 BCE, nearly 8 decades after the burning of the Temple of Artemis, Delphi faced its own threat of desecration. Brennus, a Gallic chieftain, led a massive army of Gauls, or Celts, southward into Greece. Having already plundered much of northern Greece, Brennus set his sights on the rich treasures of Delphi. The sanctuary was known to house countless valuable offerings from city-states and rulers across the Mediterranean, accumulated over centuries of reverence for the Delphic oracle. As news of the approaching Gallic horde spread, panic gripped the region. Many Greeks fled, taking what valuables they could carry. However, a small force of about 4,000 men, comprised of Phocians, Aetolians, and other Greeks, decided to make a stand at Delphi. They were vastly outnumbered by Brennus's army, estimated to be around 85,000 strong. The defenders of Delphi, despite their inferior numbers, had 2 significant advantages: the mountainous terrain, which they knew well, and, as they believed, divine protection. Delphi was, after all, the sanctuary of Apollo himself. As Brennus and his army approached Delphi, strange phenomena began to occur. According to ancient accounts, the ground shook with violent earthquakes, and great boulders broke free from Mount Parnassus, crashing down upon the Gallic invaders. Lightning bolts reportedly struck the barbarian soldiers, and ghostly warriors appeared to join the Greek defenders. Amidst this chaos, the Greek forces launched a surprise attack. The Gauls, already unnerved by the apparently supernatural events, were thrown into disarray. The battle raged fiercely, with the defenders fighting with the desperation of those protecting their most sacred site. As night fell, the temperature dropped dramatically, bringing snow and freezing rain. The Gauls, unused to such conditions and lacking proper shelter, suffered greatly. Many froze to death in the night, while others fell to their deaths from the treacherous mountain paths. The next day, reinforcements arrived for the Greek defenders, including the Athenian army. Seeing his forces decimated by the battle, the elements, and what seemed to be divine intervention, Brennus ordered a retreat. But the Greeks pursued the withdrawing Gauls relentlessly, picking off stragglers and harrying the main force. Brennus himself was wounded in the fighting. Demoralized and in pain, he allegedly took his own life rather than face the humiliation of defeat. The remnants of his once mighty army scattered, with only a fraction making it back to their homelands. The Greeks saw the deliverance of Delphi as nothing short of miraculous. The story of Delphi's salvation spread quickly throughout the Greek world, enhancing the sanctuary's already formidable reputation. These events also demonstrate the resilience of ancient Greek culture. Despite the destruction of the Temple of Artemis, the Ephesians rebuilt an even grander structure. Delphi, having withstood the Gallic invasion, continued to be a center of religious and political life for centuries to come. In both cases, the perpetrators failed in their ultimate goals. Herostratus, while achieving a kind of infamy, is remembered only for his destructive act, not celebrated as he might have hoped. Brennus and his army, seeking riches and glory, found only defeat and death at Delphi. Have you ever heard of the Cadaver Synod? It's one of the most bizarre and macabre events in medieval history. A tale so outlandish that it seems more like the plot of a dark comedy than an actual historical occurrence. Yet, this grotesque spectacle truly took place in 897 AD, forever staining the annals of papal history with its ghoulish proceedings. Picture this: Rome, the eternal city, seat of the Catholic Church, witnessed to countless momentous events throughout its long history. But on a fateful day in January 897, it would play host to a spectacle unlike any other. The newly elected Pope Stephen VI, driven by a toxic cocktail of political ambition and personal vendetta, orchestrated what can only be described as a judicial farce of epic proportions. The target of this unprecedented trial? None other than Pope Formosus, Stephen's predecessor. But here's the kicker. Formosus had been dead for months, his body already laid to rest in St. Peter's Basilica. Undeterred by such trivial matters as the accused being deceased, Stephen had Formosus's corpse exhumed, dressed in papal regalia and propped up on a throne to stand trial. Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of this act. In an era steeped in religious superstition and reverence for the dead, the desecration of a pope's grave was shocking enough. But to then subject the cadaver to a mock trial, it was an act that would send ripples through the Christian world and echo through the centuries. The charges leveled against the deceased Formosus were numerous and varied. He was accused of perjury, of coveting the papacy, and of violating church law by serving as the Bishop of Rome while he had previously been the Bishop of Porto. In essence, Stephen VI was putting Formosus on trial for the crime of having been Pope at all. As the macabre trial unfolded, a deacon was appointed to answer on behalf of the corpse. One can only imagine the surreal atmosphere in the courtroom, the stench of decay mingling with the incense, the hushed whispers of the spectators, the absurdity of a rotting corpse presiding over its own trial. Unsurprisingly, given the nature of this kangaroo court, Formosus was found guilty on all counts. The consequences were severe, even for a man already dead. All of Formosus's papal acts and ordinations were declared null and void, a decision that threw the church into chaos, invalidating the holy orders of many clergy ordained during his papacy. But Stephen VI wasn't content with merely nullifying Formosus's legacy. In a final act of desecration, he ordered that the corpse be stripped of its papal vestments. The 3 fingers of the right hand used for blessings were cut off, and the body was ultimately thrown into the Tiber River. This ghastly event, known to history as the Cadaver Synod, was more than just a bizarre footnote in history. It was a reflection of the intense political turmoil that gripped Rome and the papacy in the late 9th century. To understand the context of this gruesome event, we need to delve into the complex web of politics and power struggles that characterized this period in papal history. The late 9th century was a time of great instability for the papacy, with various factions vying for control of the Holy See. Formosus himself had been a controversial figure during his lifetime. Before becoming pope, he had been a powerful and influential bishop, known for his missionary work among the Bulgarians. However, he had also made powerful enemies, including Pope John VIII, who had excommunicated him at one point. When Formosus eventually ascended to the papacy in 891, he inherited a fraught political situation. The Italian peninsula was divided between competing factions, with various noble families and foreign powers all seeking to exert their influence over Rome and the papacy. One of the key issues was the question of imperial coronation. The Holy Roman Empire, established by Charlemagne in 800, had fragmented in the decades following his death. By Formosus's time, there were multiple claimants to the imperial throne, and the Pope's support could be crucial in legitimizing these claims. Formosus found himself caught between 2 main contenders: Lambert of Spoleto, supported by the powerful Spoleto family in central Italy, and Arnulf of Carinthia, a Germanic king. Initially, Formosus supported Lambert, even crowning him as co-emperor with his father in 892. However, as Lambert's faction grew increasingly powerful and threatening to papal independence, Formosus switched his support to Arnulf, crowning him emperor in 896. This political maneuvering made Formosus many enemies among the Italian nobility, particularly the Spoleto faction. When he died later in 896, these tensions did not die with him. Instead, they set the stage for the grotesque events of the Cadaver Synod. Stephen VI, the pope who orchestrated this macabre trial, was closely aligned with the Spoleto faction. His actions in exhuming and trying Formosus were likely motivated by a desire to delegitimize Formosus's papacy and, by extension, invalidate the imperial coronation of Arnulf. But the Cadaver Synod was more than just a political move. It was also a deeply personal vendetta. Stephen VI had been appointed Bishop of Anagni by Formosus, but he believed that this appointment had been made reluctantly. This perceived slight seems to have festered in Stephen's mind, fueling his hatred for his predecessor. The trial itself, beyond its obvious grotesquerie, was a masterclass in medieval propaganda. By publicly trying and condemning Formosus, Stephen VI was not just attacking a dead man, but attempting to erase his entire legacy. The symbolic power of seeing a former pope, albeit a dead one, stripped of his vestments and declared a false pope cannot be overstated. However, Stephen's triumph was short-lived. The Cadaver Synod proved to be a step too far, even for medieval Rome. The spectacle of the trial, the desecration of a pope's corpse, and the chaos caused by the invalidation of Formosus's acts all served to turn public opinion against Stephen VI. Within months of the trial, a popular uprising swept through Rome. Stephen was deposed, imprisoned, and ultimately strangled to death. His brief, turbulent papacy ended as grotesquely as it had been conducted. But the story doesn't end there. The aftermath of the Cadaver Synod continued to reverberate through papal politics for years to come. The next pope, Romanus, lasted only a few months before being deposed. His successor, Theodore II, though only pope for 20 days, took steps to rehabilitate Formosus's memory. He had Formosus's body, which had been recovered from the Tiber by a monk, reburied with honor in St. Peter's Basilica. The following pope, John IX, went even further. He convened a synod that annulled the Cadaver Synod, rehabilitated Formosus's memory, and ordered the acts of the Cadaver Synod to be burned. However, this was not the end of the matter. In 904, Pope Sergius III, who had participated in the Cadaver Synod as a co-judge, reversed John IX's decision and reaffirmed the findings of the original trial. This back and forth over Formosus's legacy continued for years, reflecting the ongoing political divisions within the Church and among the Roman nobility. It was a period of such instability and conflict that it became known as the Saeculum Obscurum, or Dark Age of the Papacy. The Cadaver Synod stands as a stark reminder of how far the papacy had fallen from its spiritual mission. In this period, popes were often little more than pawns in the power games of Italian noble families. The papal throne was frequently obtained through intrigue, bribery, or violence, rather than through piety or merit. This dark chapter in papal history would eventually lead to calls for reform within the Church. The Gregorian reforms of the 11th century, which sought to purify the Church and assert papal independence from secular control, can be seen in part as a reaction to the excesses and corruption exemplified by events like the Cadaver Synod. However, it's important to remember that while the Cadaver Synod was undoubtedly a low point in papal history, it was not representative of the papacy or the medieval Church as a whole. Many popes before and after this period were men of genuine faith and learning who made significant contributions to theology, philosophy, and the arts. So the next time you think politics today are strange or unsavory, remember the Cadaver Synod. It's a vivid reminder that, for all our progress, human nature, with all its flaws and foibles, remains much the same. And perhaps in some small way, that's comforting. If the Church could survive putting a corpse on trial, perhaps our institutions today are more resilient than we sometimes fear.